passage we're going to be looking at this morning is John chapter 2, verses 12 to 25. We're picking up where Gordon left off last week. And so that's again John 2, 12 to 25. I'll give you a minute to turn there. So here it's talking about Jesus. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. The Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple he found those who were selling oxen and sheep and pigeons, and the money changers sitting there. And making a whip of cords, he drove them out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told those who sold the pigeons, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." So the Jews said to him, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" And Jesus answered, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word Jesus had spoken. Now, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. But Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them, because he knew all people and needed no one to bear witness about man, for he himself knew what was in man. As you can see, there's a lot of ground to cover here this morning, and I want to help make this as easy as possible to understand. And I think if we look at it in 3 ways, we're going to be able to do that. In fact, we can look at it in light of 3 temples. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, Tyler, it's only talking about 2 temples in here, so what in the world are you talking about? Well, bear with me and we'll unpack it slowly and we'll understand what John's writing here. In one hand, you have this temple that Herod built, this beautiful temple. This temple that they're at to worship at Passover. It's big, it's gorgeous, it's magnificent, it's probably colorful, but what's going on inside is not beautiful. Jesus is not impressed with the sin that's taking place inside the temple courts, and he sees this and he's heartbroken. The second temple we'll look at is Jesus himself. He becomes the dwelling place of God. Through his death and resurrection on the cross, he becomes our mediator between God and us. And finally, the third temple we're going to look at involves us in a tremendous way. It involves our action and our reaction, and it involves a response from us. The third temple can reside in us because of Jesus. Above all this morning, I want us to see the glory of God revealed through Jesus. Above everything else. If you walk away today and you see the glory of God revealed, that's good. I want us to see how God reveals that glory through his Son in the temple. I want us to see how he does that on the cross and through his resurrection. And I want us to see how God reveals his glory through Jesus in our lives and through us as well. So we have the first temple. Like I said, it's Herod's temple. It's beautiful. Probably one of the most visually appealing things in that time. But it's not the building itself that Jesus is not impressed with. I'm sure he looked at it and said, "Wow, that's amazing. It's beautiful. This building was built to worship my Father." But that's why he's not impressed. He sees what's going on inside and he's heartbroken. And we'll get to that in a second. Before Jesus arrives at the temple, he's in Cana. So it's just backtrack a little bit. He's in Cana at the wedding, and we see his first miracle take place. He turns the water into wine, and his family's there, his disciples are there, and they see him do this, and they believe in him. And that's awesome. They see what he can do. They see his power. And we need to remember the theme throughout John is that we believe in Jesus. John 1:7 says, "He came as a witness," talking about John, "to bear witness about the light," talking about Jesus, "so that we all might believe through him." And we see people believing early on in Jesus' ministry. Now, Jesus leaves Cana with his family and goes down to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover and to come to the temple. And this is the scene that Jesus walks onto. And I just want to paint a picture here this morning for you to help you better understand. So just picture with me, just kind of take a step back in time. Picture yourself in this land. Picture yourself in Jerusalem at the temple. I want to focus a bit on the journey that they took to get there first. For some, it was a long journey. This Passover time was a time once a year where all the men in the nation were supposed to be at the temple to make their sacrifices. So people would come from Galilee, they would come from Egypt, they would make these long treks to come to Jerusalem, to this center, to worship God and to have fellowship with God. It's kind of like, say, for those of you that live in the foothills or in Coldstream or even here in Vernon, just packing up one morning and taking your family and hiking out to Kamloops to worship God, but you have to go by foot. I'm sure that would be a bit of a challenge. And it would probably be wearisome. And I mean, on this journey, you're preparing to meet with God. In your mind, you're saying, yeah, I'm going to come to the temple. I'm going to worship God. I'm going to have fellowship with God. But it's a little bit challenging because it's far away. Then when you get to the temple, you come into the courtyard, and you look to your left, and you see along this wall all these pens set up for all the animals. So you see pens for sheep, you see pens for cattle, for oxen. It said that there was pigeons there. Then you look to your left, and you see all the tables set up for the money changers. And then you look back over here, and you see somebody bartering with the animal seller, and you know, the bartering turns into arguing, and their arguing turns into yelling, and all of a sudden, the guy trying to buy the animal gets ripped off. And you see him storm away. And then you look over here at the money changers, and the similar thing is happening. They're arguing. It turns into yelling, and he storms off because he gets ripped off. So now he's gotten ripped off twice, and he's supposed to go worship God. Picture yourselves in Bethlehem Star. I know a lot of you here have experienced Bethlehem Star before, and it was my first time this past year, this past winter experiencing it. It was an amazing thing. But you go in there, into the tent, and it's just chaotic. There's animals everywhere, and there's people everywhere, and there's people bartering, and sometimes you have these little thieves running by, and you know, I'm in the corner being the centurion, yelling at kids to hit the thing harder, and it's just chaotic. And it's similar to this. Upon arriving, you just see this chaos. You just see this marketplace. It's not really a place to worship anymore. It's been converted into this marketplace. And this is the scene that Jesus walks onto here at the temple. This is his Father's house. What are they doing? It has been turned into a marketplace. And the focus here is on the seller, not on the buyers, because they have to buy anyways. They're coming all the way from Galilee, from Egypt, all these places surrounding Jerusalem, and they're not going to bring their animals with them. It's too much of a hassle. So they'll buy it when they get there. And so they don't have a choice. They could have set up outside the temple, outside the courtyard. And that's where the focus is. You know, they're setting up in the courtyard for selfish gain, for greed. You know, and from a business standpoint, this looks pretty good. You know, let's just set up right in here. They have to buy the animals anyways. We'll jack up the price. We'll make them pay whatever they want. They'll come in, and they'll walk away with their money in our pockets, and it's, you know, day well done for us. And Jesus saw this. He saw this and was completely heartbroken at the greed and the sin taking place in his Father's house. And this was his Father's house, not theirs. They had defiled it. They had corrupted it. A place meant for the cultivation of fellowship and worship with God has been transformed into this marketplace and filled with this sin. So what's Jesus' reaction? We see that he's filled with passion, with zeal. In verse 17, zeal for his Father's house consumed him, and he reacts furiously. He makes a whip of cords. He begins driving out the animals. He's driving out the oxen. I mean, these oxen are big animals. You can imagine for a second, just even your dog, when a dog gets excited, they just kind of lose track of everything else, and they just run around and they go crazy, and they just knock everything over, and they make this trail of destruction. Well, now times that by 10, and you got these massive animals, these big oxen, that I'm sure just have this tunnel vision of getting out of there because they're being chased, and they're making this massive trail of destruction behind them. And it's chaotic. And then on top of that, Jesus was flipping tables and pouring out the money and getting rid of all that he saw that was filthy. But why is Jesus' reaction so extreme? Could there not have been a conversation? Could he not have pulled one of the priests aside and said, look, I see what's going on here, and I'm not happy with it. I think you need to do something about this. I mean, why the whip? Why the anger? Why the furious reaction? Well, I'll tell you, it was the love that he had for the Father that drove his response. Jesus was furious not just because they let their money and their love for money defile the temple, but because they were masking it in the way they were. They cloaked their sin with godliness. They cloaked their sin with religion, with this Christian behavior, and Jesus saw right through that. And is this not exactly what we do sometimes? We put on the Sunday face and we come to church, we shake the right people's hands and we say the right things, but as soon as we're outside of these church walls, or as soon as we're away from the fellowship of Christian believers and our friends here at church, we sometimes just act in a completely different way, in a way that doesn't glorify God. And I'm guilty of this, guys. This kind of thing does not impress God whatsoever. Just like the actions of those people in the temple, we mask our sin. We hide behind our Christianity. So we're at the temple. The scene is messy. The smoothest of the day has been interrupted by Jesus. And we're at the temple. We're about to buy our animal, or we're about to go in and make a sacrifice, or give our sacrifice to the priest so that he can make it. And all of a sudden, all this unfolds in front of us. And we're just in awe. We can't believe what's going on. And then once the dust settles, all of a sudden one of these sellers pipes up and says, Jesus, what sign do you show for doing these things? Give us a sign. Where's your authority? Why are you doing this? But they use this question as a dodge, as a diversion. By asking the question, they are confirming that what they are doing is wrong. They want to avoid the issue altogether, so they turn it around on Jesus. And I've been here before. There have been times when found out, or caught in my sin, that I tried to dodge. I tried to divert the question. And my parents were here in the first service, and so I got to pick on them a little bit, but now they're not. So you can just imagine what it would be like. Often when I was a little guy, I just, when caught in sin, or when found out that I was doing something wrong, I would try to shift it onto my brother, or sometimes my sister, not so much, but mainly my brother, right? And for those of you that had siblings, you can relate to this. You know what it's like. Or I would even question my mom, like, well, Mom, I didn't really hear you say that, when really I did. I would try to hide my sin. I would try to just pass it on to somebody else, and I wouldn't deal with the issue. Children are funny like this. Although seemingly innocent, they try to shift the blame, right? For those of you that have kids, you see this all the time. And for me, I see it on a weekly basis in junior youth. I hang out with these kids, and it's a great time. It's awesome. We're playing a game, but all of a sudden I catch somebody cheating, or someone's beating up their friend. I don't know why, but they are. That's what kids do, I guess. And they're doing something that they know is wrong, and so then when I go to confront them, it's automatically the blame game. And they just try to shift the blame. And this is serious. We can see that in this text, and we can see that in ourselves. How often do we try to justify our sin? We say things like, or think things to ourselves like, did God really say that? Did he really say that I shouldn't be angry with this person? Did he really say that I shouldn't be complaining about my job, or about the things that don't make me happy in the church, or about the government? Did he really say that? I mean, everybody else is doing it. Why can't I? We justify it. We can fool ourselves way too easily and complain about these things. And we forget about the instruction and the promises that God has left us. I mean, we've been doing this right from the beginning of time. The serpent says to Eve, did God really say not to eat from that? Did he really say you're going to die? He didn't say that. And so then Eve takes this advice, this horrible advice, and justifies her sin. And then Adam sins as well. And here we are today doing the same things. We justify our sin. Here in John 2, the question, give us a sign, tells me that they're trying to avoid the heart issue. They don't need more signs. That's all they ever want. That's all they ever got. They were oohed and awed by the things that were visually enticing and by the things that amazed them and the things that made them feel good. And yes, Jesus has a lot of wow factor. But that's not where it stops. But for them, that was where it stopped. That's where the bar stopped. Their belief was only skin deep. Later on in the Gospel of John, Jesus is with his brothers, and they see that he's able to do these great things, and so they urge him to take his talent to Judea. And they say in chapter 7, verse 4, no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. And then it goes on to say, for not even his brothers believed in him. Not even his brothers. His own brothers were sign seekers. They wanted to ride the coattails of what their brother Jesus could do. They were treating Jesus like a hockey player. I mean, Jesus isn't Wayne Gretzky. They were looking at him and seeing all this talent, all this potential, and then automatically thinking of themselves, saying, man, if we sign this guy on our team, he can take us a long way. Imagine what's in it for us. I mean, we're his brothers. I mean, we got to gain something from this. But folks, Jesus is not a hockey player. He's not Wayne Gretzky. He is God. He's the creator of the universe. He's so much more than that. He's divine. He's eternal. He's perfect. He's holy. He's the giver of all that is good. He sustains us. He's faithful. And he loves us. Selfish gain. Selfish gain is what drove the people in the temple. Selfish gain is what drove his brothers. And selfish gain is what far too often drives you and me. I think it's safe to say that pride is a groundwork for all sin. Pride is at the core of our disobedience to God. Because when I'm sinning, I'm only thinking of one person and one person only, and that person is me. It's pretty prideful. And that takes place whenever we sin. So what's Jesus' reaction to this question? Give us a sign. He says, destroy the temple, and in 3 days, I'm going to raise it up. I'm going to raise up the temple after just 3 days of destroying it. That's a pretty bold proclamation. And we can see that the second temple is, in fact, Jesus himself. He's not talking about the building. I mean, in a sense, they're already destroying the building by their sin, by their greed, by their marketplace. But Jesus is talking about something different here. I'm not a Greek scholar, but I do understand that there are two meanings for temple in this text. The first temple is talked about in this passage using the word hieron. And this word simply means the temple itself. Look, there's the hieron. There's the building. There's the building that Herod built. But Jesus uses a different word here. He uses the word naos. And this word naos means the dwelling place of God. And in the temple itself, the naos was the Holy of Holies. In the temple, it had the dwelling place of God. And now it's Jesus himself. Jesus is the dwelling place of God. He replaces the act of the old temple. This is the new covenant. The function of the temple is now in Jesus Christ. The divine dwelling place of God is in him. And this took place through his death and his resurrection. He is now the mediator between God and man. Through Jesus, we can have personal relationship with God. This is the temple that I was talking about that is the foundation of our faith. Jesus says, I will destroy it and raise it up. By destroying Jesus, they are destroying the temple of God. But Jesus rose again to restore that which was holy. Until now, it was left to man to intercede for man. And like this Passover time, there were times once a year and other times that a high priest could enter into the Holy of Holies and make a sacrifice for the people. But there's a problem with this method. It was never good enough. They're mere men. They're not perfect. You can only do so much with man interceding for man. Sorry about that. There had to be a replacement. And that's where Jesus steps in. And he steps in and says, no, I'm going to do this once for all. I'm going to intercede for man. I'm going to be that mediator between God and man for good. And as fallen, sinful man, we deserve hell. But there's hope. Hope in Jesus. Hope in the grace that he provides through what he has done on the cross. And this leads to yet another response. We first looked at this temple, this Herod's temple. We saw this temple that was beautiful, but being defiled by the sin, and Jesus wasn't impressed with it. So that's the first one. The second one we see is Jesus, and he really is the true temple. He is God. He holds the glory of God. He is the dwelling place of God. And now we have this third temple. It's us. We saw the response of Jesus, and we saw the response of those in Jerusalem, and now we need our response. What are we going to do? This temple can now reside in us because of Jesus. It is important that we grasp the significance of this. We are the temple. We are the naos. And he wants us to be beautiful. He wants us to be clean. If we have accepted Jesus, he now lives in us. It says in 1 Corinthians 6, and you can turn there if you want, 1 Corinthians 6, 19 to 20. It talks about the temple. And Paul writes, or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God with your body. And that is what I said at the beginning, that the temple needs our response and action. If we are truly saved by that amazing grace, then we ought to live in a way that shows it. But I know it's not always easy. We drag stuff in. We let pride step in the way of worshiping God. So what's our response going to be? The Jews in Jerusalem responded with belief, but like we looked at earlier, it was skin-deep belief, just surface level. It wasn't real belief in who Jesus really was. They didn't see the glory of God. And he can see whether or not we truly believe, just like he saw in them. He can see right through us. Something that should blow us away is that Jesus knows us to the core, just as he knew them. Verses 24 to 25 in this text says that Jesus knows us, and that's why he didn't entrust himself to us, because he knows what's in man. He knows us to the core. He knows us deeply. There are no secrets with Jesus. And shouldn't that cause us to think for a moment? It scares me. Yeah, it comforts me. It comforts me in a way that nothing else can. There's no other relationship like the one we can have with Jesus, with God. He knows the deepest, sometimes darkest pockets of our soul. And that is scary, but it's also comforting, because even though he knows that about each and every one of us here this morning, even though he sees the filth that we drag into our lives, the sin, the pride, the greed, the anger, he sees that and still chooses to love us. He still chose to send his son to die for us on the cross. It's amazing. What amazing love that is. Jesus knows if our belief is only skin deep. He knows if there's spiritual substance or not. Real faith takes place when the walls are closing in around us, and when we're sinking, going down, and the name of Jesus is still lifted high. It's not to say that God doesn't bless us, because I know he does. He loves us and wants to experience that joy that we can find in him. But the hard times do come, and often those hard times are ugly. Some good friends of ours back in Manitoba have gone through a very hard time the past couple years, 2.5 years. We found out 2.5 years ago that our friend Kelly was diagnosed with cancer, brain tumor, and those few years were just very challenging with chemo, with surgery. Some of you have been there. Some of you are there right now. You know what it's like. You know how hard it can be. And you know how hard it can be to trust in Jesus. But the reaction of the family has just blown me away. And you can put that slide up there, Jeff. I just want to read something that Ken wrote on his Facebook wall. Getting with the times here, technology, got to use the Facebook. But he wrote this the day after she died, and it just blew me away, his response to what God is doing in his life. He said, "The Lord is my portion and my peace," or is he? It is a question that you can only answer when you are faced with the most challenging and toughest of situations in your life. When Kelly was diagnosed with cancer, this was one of those times. And yet we leaned not on our own understanding. We surrendered our will to God and asked for his strength and grace. God is so loving that he gave us his peace that can't be explained. He gave Kelly, Ben, Rebecca, and I the strength and weakness we needed to walk the road we had to walk. We have had several occasions when we could have been mad and angry, yet this is a sinful response to what we can't control. So our response would be to surrender and ask God for the strength to help us let go and let him be glorified. In the end, all the glory, honor, and praise goes to Jesus. Kelly ran the race that God had for her, and today, August 27th at noon, Kelly went to be with Jesus. My friends, that is true belief. In such devastating times, they found peace in Jesus. They surrendered, and they knew that God had a plan in all of this. They found their joy in Jesus alone. Their zeal is for Christ. If we are impressed or simply moved by the signs and the nice things that God does for us, then we're done. We're dreadfully lost. Stephanie and I were back in Winnipeg this past week, and I got a chance to meet with, Stephanie too, we got a chance to meet with Ken, and again, just so encouraged by his reaction. And I asked him, I said, "Ken, how can I pray for you?" And his answer was very long, rightfully so. He had a lot to talk about. But to sum it all up, he said, "Tyler, you can pray that the Lord would be my portion. The Lord would be my portion, that I'd be satisfied with Jesus." It was very, very encouraging. It's obviously a hard time for him and his family. Grieving, doubt. But like he said, he trusted in Jesus. He had this zeal for God. And that hasn't left. And it was with Kelly when she was still alive too. Her attitude was just so awesome to see. She just totally trusted in Jesus and knew that he had purpose in all of this. That's real faith. Do our lives reflect that Jesus is living inside of us? Or are we masking our sin with Christianity? Are we masking our sin with this religious behavior? We need to keep our temples beautiful. How does God see us taking care of our temples? If he were to look into your life, into my life, would he be pleased? Or would there need to be some tables that need to be flipped over? Would he see the filth in our life? And I'm sure there's tables this morning that need to be flipped there. And we've dragged in this pride, we've dragged in this anger and lust and contentment, all this sin, all this filth that needs cleansed by Jesus. And so my challenge for you guys this morning is that you would ask God to show you where your zeal is, to show you if it's for him or if it's for something else. Sometimes our zeal can be misplaced. It can be for things that seem good, but we're really just replacing them for Jesus. Is our zeal for Jesus? So examine your hearts. Ask God to examine your heart. Surrender to Christ. Folks, I know that when you surrender to Jesus, you will find that he's all you need. You will find that he will satisfy you more than anything else can.